me as well. So, we've got 25 minutes, slightly less than perhaps. The elevator pitch essentials. You know this idea that if you've got between here and the third floor to sell your idea. So it's a fairly slow lift, but I've got to the third floor, so be quick. That's me on Tiananmen Square in 1989. Not much more hair than I've got now, but a hell of a lot younger. I was a hack, as we say in the trade, and then I became a shrink. Became one of them, I don't put people on the couch, so I am now what one might call one of these, a shrag. I'm also a cyclotherapist because I'm passionate about cycling and I cycle silly distances, and I had a blog for a while which was called cyclotherapist.com. I've worked abroad for 30 years with the BBC, Reuters. I was posted in Moscow, East Berlin, West Berlin, Vienna, China, lots of splitting. My parents divorced when I was 10, lots of splitting, so lots of good rich material to work with. And the problem about EMDR is I am incredibly enthusiastic about EMDR. Any of you who know me know this, and there is a danger of self-combustion. So this is a picture of what I hope won't happen in the next 25 minutes. And I hope I can't introduce you all to the insight too much into the details of EMDR, but I hope that I might light some fires. It is the most extraordinary therapy. Mm-hmm. How many of you use EMDR or trained in EMDR? Okay, a minority, but a healthy minority. Okay, so the old rule of radio: tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. So, 3 plants growing. On the left-hand side, I'm going to say the very simple stuff about EMDR. It focuses explicitly and essentially on trauma, and I would say that every single one of my clients presents with trauma, big T or small t, developmental trauma, childhood trauma, misattunement with primary caregiver, and so on. In a safe therapeutic relationship, EMDR adds bilateral stimulation. I'll explain as we go along. EMDR fires up our body's evolutionary instinct to heal. It's now called the Adaptive Information Processing Model. It used to be called the Accelerated Information Processing Model. I'll come to that a little bit later. And usually it works. Not always, but it's pretty damned effective. Would you agree, those of you who use it, it's pretty damned effective? Some nods. So what is EMDR? The lady on the right, Francine Shapiro, discovered the impact, the effect of bilateral eye movements in 1987. She did a study based on her awareness that if she moved her eyes left and right, her distress around her own cancer diagnosis reduced. What's this about? And asked a few friends, would you just move your eyes around and think of something distressing, move your eyes backwards and forwards and see what happens. And they all said, same happened to us. So she developed this EMD, eye movement desensitization to start with, protocol, did some research on it, and it kept working. And then she realized as she did the work in the late 1980s that actually it was more than just desensitization. There was quite a profound reprocessing also going on, so she called it EMDR and developed a whole protocol, wrote books, and it's now extensively researched and recommended by NICE and by health organizations around the world, particularly for PTSD. The chap on the left there is Udi Oren, who is at the moment the president of EMDR Europe, and this is a photograph taken to the Edinburgh conference, 1,000 delegates from across Europe of the European EMDR Association in June. So what do you know of EMDR? How many of you sort of have an idea? You've heard of it. How many of you have heard of EMDR? Wow, fantastic. How many of you would like to know more? Yes. How many of you would think you might even go and train in it one day? Right. You ones who have got your hands up, I want that to change. Right. So it's waving fingers. Here we go. Here's one. There's another one. There's another one. There's another one. And here's Hillary Clinton. And for the ladies among you, he's at it too. It isn't actually just waving fingers, it's bilateral stimulation of left and right hemisphere, but we'll come to that in a moment. So what is EMDR? It's a structured approach to unpacking a trauma memory, and we focus on the trauma. We don't wait years till somebody tells us they were abused in childhood. We get their trauma history, we create safety, and then we focus right in. So it's an 8-phase protocol in its standard protocol form. Starts with history taking, preparation, safety, client safety, assessment. You focus on a trauma and work out, unpack the trauma. I'll get you doing one in a moment. Along those lines, then we desensitize using the bilateral stimulation, install the positives that come out of it. We do a body scan, we check the body. EMDR works with cognitions, emotions and the body very explicitly in an integrated way. Closure and re-evaluation. So what does that add up to? Hang on, what on earth that got to do with? Harry Potter and Dumbledore in big cheesy relationship. You see? That's the EMDR. Harry Potter and Dumbledore in big cheesy relationship. Okay, got it? That's the only way I can remember the 8 phases in the correct order. But actually, what EMDR really is about is accessing the brain's and the body's natural desire to heal. That's what we do for a living. It's what human beings do. It's what, as long as we're alive, we're healing. When we stop healing, we die. We're sitting on, I say to my clients, I get really sort of mystical with my clients, I say we're sitting on 18 billion years of evolution in the universe. We are stardust, as Joni Mitchell famously said, and quite a lot of us will remember that song when it first came out. So we sit on 3.5 billion years of the evolution of life on Earth. So we know how to heal. We just have to get out of the way. We have to clean a wound out, as we do with a physical wound. You clean the wound out, and guess what? People heal. It's as simple as that. That's a simple way of explaining the AIP model, Adaptive Information Processing. And the essence of EMDR is safety. You all know about that in client work. Fire up the networks. We've got to get the feelings going, the physical sensations. Get the memory networks, the old memory networks stored in state-specific form at the time of the trauma. Fire them up. Go back to the picture. Go back to the feelings. Go back to the physical sensations that are still in the body. We all know this when we work with trauma. When somebody presents with a sexual abuse experience at the age of 4, we have a 4-year-old in front of us. Talking like a 4-year-old, feeling like a 4-year-old, looking like a 4-year-old. Then we had the BLS. That's the thing that differentiates EMDR from any other form of therapy, including tapping, which has a different construct. Bilateral stimulation, BLS. And then we end with safety. Basically, that's EMDR. I'll tell you a story about Sally Dowler, mother of Millie Dowler, just to illustrate how incredibly powerful EMDR can be. Some of you, how many of you have heard this story already? Those of you at the Edinburgh conference, Sally Dowler presented at the Edinburgh EMDR conference. And she told the story that she had been devastated, of course, by the loss of Millie. She'd had drug treatment, medication for more than 10 years. She had had counselling, which was nice, didn't make a difference. She'd had psychoanalysis, which was not very nice and didn't make a difference, in her experience. It just didn't get anywhere. She was in a terrible state about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and she was about to be put on lithium. This is her story. We had 1,000 delegates absolutely transfixed by this story. This is what happens to us every week with clients. I'll tell you my story at the end of my presentation, my personal client story. And she described how her psychiatrist wanted to put her on lithium when she was in such a bad state. So she's given this presentation publicly, so I'm not breaching confidences here. And her normal psychiatrist was away on holiday, and a locum was there and said, I tell you what, before we do this, why don't you try this EMDR thing? I know somebody who does it. And Sally Dowler then described how in the focused session, the 3rd session of EMDR with this therapist, they went in on the trauma, they focused right in on the trauma, and her worst thought and fear around Millie was her body lying unloved, worm-eaten, cold, wet in a dark forest, which is where she was found after many years. And she could not get this out of her mind and her heart. The emotions were identified, the physical sensations, and they started the BLS, started the bilateral stimulation. And Sally Dowler described how she was with the body, and suddenly the sun came out in her imagination. And there were birds singing, and it was green, and they were in a beautiful clearing in the forest. It was incredibly moving. And Millie was there. And they lay and embraced on the green sward. And Millie said to Mum, "Mum, it's okay now. I'm in a better place. You can let go." That was her transformative moment. And she's okay. Boy, is she an evangelist for EMDR. And that kind of story, those of us who use EMDR, that happens all the time. It's weird. And when a client says, "Whoa, this is weird, what's going on now?" you know it's working. So, we have a Kurdish client. So today we're all going to look at how we would work with a Kurdish refugee. I can't remember exactly how old he is. Judy, how old is he? Sort of 40-ish? 40-ish. So his grandfather and father, he's here as an asylum, he's come to the UK and he's got an asylum now, I think. His grandfather and father were killed when he was a baby. At 16 he witnessed his oldest brother's violent arrest. The family escaped to Turkey and then came to the UK. Tortuous legal process, eventually got leave to remain. He's now presenting with depression, anxiety, panic attacks, headaches and nightmares. And his mother has just died. So what are we going to do with EMDR? What will I do with him? Well, first of all, you know the old adage about how many therapists it takes to change a light bulb, don't you? I think you all know that one. Yeah, one, but the light bulb has to want to change. So you're never going to get anywhere if the light bulb doesn't want to change. So you do the usual stuff, and the EMDR isn't rocket science. You've got to have a good relationship. You screen for risks, dissociation. You need a safe container, safe therapeutic environment, client readiness. There has to be a safe relationship. The environment has to be safe. Social support. You know, you've got to be careful when you open boxes with trauma. But don't be too careful, because the most important thing we can do for our trauma clients is to experience and survive, to witness and survive their distress. So the EMDR approach, we have case conceptualization to work out sort of what are the thoughts that are locked into the system. Where has this dysfunction got lodged in the memory networks? We identify keystone memories. So we take a trauma history about now, obviously he's presenting with distress around his mother's death, childhood, infancy, death, loss, teenage years, political violence, flight. So there's stacks of trauma with this client. And then we prepare, we resource them, and very explicitly use bilateral stimulation in bursts to lock in resource figures, like a nurturing figure, a protector figure, a safe place. You may not have a safe place, but then a special, peaceful, sacred place, perhaps, in their imagination. We use loads of guided imagination. EMDR sort of brings together the best of pretty much all the therapy approaches that I've ever learned. Then what do we do? And the difference thing about EMDR is that we get the laser out. And we focus right in where it hurts. Like when you go to the doctor, you don't talk to the doctor for weeks and weeks. He says straight away, or she says, "Tell me where it hurts." So we go in where it hurts. We're going to clean this wound out. But we do it in slices, in bite-sized chunks. How do you eat a watermelon? You don't eat a watermelon in one go. So we unpack the trauma. We identify the bite-sized chunks so that it doesn't feel like that. We take it one chunk at a time. And we have a concept of the memory networks going down from the presenting the target, and lots of these memory networks go down. And what happens is when we work on a memory network, we drill down with bursts of bilateral stimulation, perhaps 25, 40 seconds, maybe a bit longer, and then back to target, and then they report back what they're getting. There's very little therapist intervention once we're working. And they tell us what they're getting, go with that, we say. Ooh, next one, what are you getting? Go with that, and carry on down, and it clears itself out, because that's what the brain and the nervous system want to do. We empty the container with all the distress in it, quite astonishingly effectively sometimes, and we get what's called a generalizing effect across the networks, where we go into another trauma, we discover, oh my goodness me, that's actually been sorted out and defused as we were doing the first one. So, how does the bilateral stimulation work? I just love that one. Classically, Francine Shapiro waved her fingers in front of the client, and you keep your head still and eyes go backwards and forwards. There is some research that suggests eye movements are the most effective way of working. I very rarely use eye movements these days. You can, because you get RSI if you do this too much. There are light bars. I use buzzers, little buzzers, or I use knee taps. I now work with a modified protocol from Laurel Parnell from the States, and I tap the side of the knees and sit right in front of the client. And it's very effective. So the key thing is that it's bilateral stimulation. And that's the difference about EMDR. So having told you, I'm now going to tell you. Having told you what I was going to tell you, I'm now going to tell you. So, middle plant, EMDR focuses explicitly and essentially on trauma. In a safe therapeutic relationship, it adds bilateral stimulation. EMDR fires up our body's evolutionary instinct to heal, and usually it works. You get this once more. So I want to ask you very quickly, briefly, to think, this is what, 1 minute, just quick, think of 2 or 3, I put 4, sometimes we do 10 in the work when we're working with clients. Quickly think, close your eyes, think of a bad thing, a couple of bad things that have happened to you in your life that, still hurt, just briefly. And then write down a couple of key words, and then the words you've got, just look at them, and on what we call a SUD scale, subjective units of distress, just rate it 0 to 10. 0 is it's history, it's done, that's my parents' divorce, hey, it's over. In fact, my stepmother died 2 days ago, which is interesting, but that's another story. That was a 10 until, in my case, until not very long ago, but it's now completely a 0. A 10 is, whoa, that's still there, that's not processed. I'm still carrying that stuff. So just briefly, 1 minute, close your eyes, or keep going. 2 or 3 bad things, keywords, and rate them. This is something on your tables, please just discuss, to keeping yourself safe, obviously, in what you share, but just discuss this bit about focusing in on specific events that still hold charge for you. Okay? Let me do that for a moment. Sing a song. Could you just, when you're done, could you just put your hand up? When you're ready for me to carry on. Okay, I'm going on. You can carry on talking about this amongst yourselves. How does it work? In essence, if you think that the trauma sits at the back of the brain, right brain limbic system, and in our thinking functions, in our left brain, prefrontal cortex, the key thing is to partner them up. So we get the memories out of what Chris Brayne would call SAM, situationally accessible memory, and we bring them into verbally accessible memory, and they go backwards and forwards. I've got 5 minutes, thank you. And the clients actually sometimes say, "How is it going? It feels like there's stuff just going backwards and forwards in my head." So in a sense, we get the memories out from the limbic system that have been stored in state-specific form from the time that they were experienced, the physical sensations, the emotions, the thoughts. I'm a bad girl. I had a client once who was her memory was age 3 in a red dress, standing at the top of the stairs, listening to her parents arguing, saying to herself, "I'm a bad girl, it's my fault." My goodness me, was it hard to help her find a perspective, a compassionate adult perspective on that little girl, and recognise, of course it wasn't her fault, of course she wasn't a bad girl. But that can be really locked deep in the system. And we get it out and make it safe, and then put it back in again, into the limbic system and the right brain in a safe, processed, integrated form. And Ian McGilchrist, if you know his fantastic book, The Master and His Emissary, which is on sale outside, he describes how the way the brain seems to work is the right brain does the isness of now, to quote Eckhart Tolle. It does multitasking, it's present, but it can't sort things out. It needs the left brain, the emissary, to get a perspective on it, and then the information is handed back to the right brain for integration. And that seems to be possibly how EMDR works. So, left brain, right brain, those of you who know a little bit about brain science, the right field of vision is processed by the left brain and vice versa. So when you move a hand across somebody's field of vision, you are firing up left, right, left, right. Very simple. And it works. How does it work? Meditation, this is a picture of my children's toys. If you've got the grown-ups who are trying to sort something out, you want the kids to go off and play with the toys. And in a sense, what EMDR and the clicking and the buzzing and finger movement seems to do is perhaps to distract the left brain, put the client into a kind of meditative dream state. It's emphatically not hypnosis, emphatically not. But there is a kind of dream process that gets going, where if you do a functional magnetic resonance image of a client undergoing EMDR, The brain is lighting up in exactly the same way as it does when it dreams, with REM sleep, except that the left prefrontal cortex is also online, which it is not when you sleep. So it's a kind of dream energy that comes in. So these are pictures I took in Tibet of monks chanting and drumming. So left, right, left, right. The Sufis do this whirling dervish. They do the zikr. Those of you who've done Sufi retreats know the zikr, the head movement, which is left, right as well. We've been doing left-right stimulation since human beings first stood on two legs. It's meditation, clicking beads. My best example of an EMDR client, which is my 2 minutes, that's perfect. This is my last bit. This was a client who's given me permission to tell her story, and she and I were going to write an article for The Guardian, but I hate writing. I wrote for 30 years. I loathe writing, but I love psychotherapy. Boy, do I love this work. Trauma is so rewarding. It is fantastically rewarding working with trauma. So this client, her partner had died very, very traumatically. She found the body. She pushed the door open and his body was inert behind the bedroom door. And in about the third or the fourth session, she'd had 10 years of psychoanalysis and it hadn't worked. And in our third session, a bit like with Sally Dowler, we were focusing on this moment when she pushes the door. We were doing the bilateral stimulation. Suddenly something happened. And this is her narrative, which she wrote to me. I went through the door and I picked up his body and carried him through to our bedroom and laid him down on the bed. And then I climbed in behind him and spooned him, my knees tucked up behind his and my arm around him. I always tear up when I do this, so I'll see if I can get through without blubbering. When I lay with him, his spirit lay down behind me and spooned me. The three of us lay there together until I realized that the real him was now his spirit. And we got up, leaving his body on the bed, and left the room hand in hand. The hallway and the stairs were dark, but the front door was open, and we were walking towards daylight. We walked through the garden and turned left down the road, crossed it and turned into the lane that leads down to the river. And then opened the wrought iron gate into an old walled wood that was full of new green leaves and white spring blossom. This is her words. As we took the path through the trees towards the river, she's got her eyes closed and a tapestry in her hands, and streaming with tears. And I don't know this is happening, she tells me this afterwards. As we took the path through the trees towards the river, I picked Blossom and stuffed it in his pockets. He was wearing a lovely old shabby brown corduroy jacket and there were flowers spilling out of it. He was light-footed with an energy I'd often seen in him that made me think of a young rabbit or a fawn. Whoops, I'm there. We walked through to the other side of the wood, came out onto the small road that follows the edge of the river, and we walked onto the little beach that's beside the White Swan pub in bottom of Ferry Road where I now live. There was a rowing boat sitting at the edge of the water. He turned to me, looking bright-eyed and happy, and gave me a smacker of a kiss on the lips, and then pushed the boat off into the water and climbed in and started rowing. He was skirting the edge of Eel Pie Island and heading downstream, looking at me and disappearing off towards the sea. I ran along the side of the river and somewhere down the towpath he gave me a big wave and disappeared round a bend in the river. She was done. Her PTSD was over. And I think I won't fill that in because you had that already. Finally, EMDR, the Heineken effect. EMDR refreshes the parts other therapists cannot reach. And Dr. Spock says illogical. There we are. Google EMDR, but add a dose of salt to the naysayers. There's my email address, and the rest of it is to be discussed. Thank you very much for your attention.